a humble suburban girl and a magnate in debt with life. An unlikely chance unites them in a story of betrayal, overcoming, and second chances. Prepare yourself for a tale filled with revelations and tension. Los Angeles. A city where dreams are made, but where many are lost along the way. Amid boiling pots and authoritative shouts, Emma Carter, a kitchen assistant at an upscale restaurant, was struggling to prove her worth. Surrounded by arrogant chefs and a tyrannical boss, she went unnoticed, like a forgotten ingredient in a complex recipe. But deep within her, there was something no one saw, a determination that refused to be extinguished. Emma grew up far from the spotlight. In a small suburban neighborhood, she learned early on that life was built on tough choices and hard work. Her parents, who taught her to value every meal, fueled her dream of turning simple dishes into unforgettable stories. Yet, in the elitist environment of the restaurant, her passion was often stifled by the disdain of colleagues who saw her humble background as an unforgivable flaw. Between tasks, Emma was constantly reminded of her place. "That's not how you cut a fillet," the boss would shout, his disapproving glare becoming a routine. Other cooks laughed, as if her humiliation was a welcome break from the pressure of work. But Emma didn't give up. Every critique was an opportunity to improve, every rejection a fuel to prove she could do so much more. On the other side of the city, Logan Hayes lived a different kind of loneliness. Wealthy, charismatic, and reclusive, he was the epitome of hollow success. After losing his wife under circumstances that still haunted him, Logan withdrew, hiding behind the walls of his mansion. His younger brother, Derek, was the only family tie left, though their relationship was far from harmonious. Derek, with his charming smile and dubious intentions, thrived in chaos, manipulating situations to his advantage while Logan bore the weight of past decisions that gnawed at him. Despite all his wealth, Logan felt something essential was missing, something money couldn't buy. He was trapped between despair and guilt, seeking redemption in ways even he didn't fully understand. While Emma faced her daily struggles in the kitchen, Logan prepared for a rare public appearance. The event was set to take place in the same restaurant where Emma worked, and their paths were about to cross under circumstances that would change their lives forever. Emma had no idea that, in that luxurious hall, she would be forced to confront not only rejection but also an unexpected danger that would place her at the center of a perilous plot. Amid the rising tensions of the kitchen and the secrets surrounding Logan, fate seemed to conspire. A moment of courage, a spark of renewal, could mean the difference between a destroyed life and a second chance. For Emma, the challenges ahead would be more intense than any dinner service. For Logan, it would be the opportunity to face his demons and discover that even the worst falls can offer new perspectives. The sound of clinking glasses, rehearsed laughter, and the aroma of the most sophisticated dishes filled the hall. Behind the scenes, Emma worked tirelessly, trying to keep her head down while her colleagues whispered cruel jokes about her. It was just another exhausting night, until something caught her eye. In the corner of the kitchen, amid the chaos, Emma saw Derek Hayes, Logan's brother, doing something odd. He looked nervous, glancing around as he fiddled with a glass of wine. Curious but cautious, Emma kept watching from a distance. Derek seemed so at ease in his actions that it almost appeared normal. But Emma knew something was wrong. The way he stirred the liquid, as if mixing something, wasn't an ordinary gesture. A chill ran down her spine. Could he be tampering with the drink? And if he was, who could be the target of such a treacherous act? Moments later, Emma saw the glass being carried into the main hall. Her heart raced as she realized the wine was intended for Logan Hayes. The magnate sat at a prominent table, surrounded by businessmen and influential figures. The tension in Emma's chest grew with every second. She didn't know what was in the drink, but the thought of someone being in danger was unbearable. Yet, she hesitated. Who would believe a kitchen assistant? She knew how she was seen there, invisible. As doubts consumed her, Emma heard her mother's voice in her memory, "Always do what's right, even when no one is watching." The advice echoed in her mind like an urgent reminder. Emma looked around. No one else seemed to notice anything amiss. Everything appeared under control, or so everyone thought. The determination that had always been within her began to swell, pushing fear aside. But it was impossible to ignore the desperation. Emma knew that by intervening, she could risk her job or even her safety. Derek was powerful, charming, and cunning, the kind of man who could twist any accusation against him into something against her. He wouldn't have trouble turning the tables. And if no one believed her, the daily disdain she already faced could become unbearable. Even so, Emma couldn't shake the sense of urgency. Logan seemed oblivious to the danger, which only heightened her anxiety. Was it possible no one else noticed? This man's life was in her hands, yet the courage needed to act seemed beyond her grasp. Doubt and fear waged war in her mind as the seconds ticked by. Deep down, Emma knew that if she stayed silent, she'd never forgive herself. The rejection she faced daily couldn't outweigh the guilt of not trying to save someone. Taking a deep breath, she made up her mind. She would do what was right, even if no one believed her. Emma stood frozen, gripping her apron as if it could contain the storm of emotions within her. The hall felt distant yet so close. She knew what she had to do, but doubt was like an unstoppable tide. Who am I to disrupt an event like this? She thought. A kitchen assistant. That's all. It was how others saw her, and sometimes how she saw herself. The memory of Derek's cold smile lingered in her mind. She could picture the scene, interrupting the dinner, only for him to use his influence to make her the villain. She just wants attention, he'd say, and everyone would believe him. After all, it was always easier to discredit the small than to challenge the powerful. The rejection Emma faced every day in the restaurant was already a heavy burden. Why risk making it unbearable? Meanwhile, the guests were toasting, laughing at jokes she would never understand. Logan Hayes seemed distant, oblivious to the danger. Emma felt a tightening in her chest. What if she was wrong? What if there was nothing wrong with that glass? She would be humiliated in ways she couldn't even imagine. Fear grew, transforming into tension. Her feet were glued to the ground. Act or stay silent. Both choices seemed equally terrible. Emma's gaze returned to the kitchen. Pots sizzled, dishes piled up, and her colleagues continued working, carefree. No one else seemed to notice what was happening. It was as if time had stopped for her, while the world around her moved at a frantic pace. She wanted to scream, but her voice felt stuck in her throat. It would be easier to stay silent, let the moment pass, and hope everything turned out fine. But something inside her wouldn't let her ignore it. It wasn't just about Logan. It was about what she believed in, the values she had always carried. Still, insecurity kept whispering, "What if you ruin everything?" Her mother's words echoed again, "Do what's right, even when no one is watching." But Emma wondered if that still held true in a world where no one seemed to care about what was right. As she hesitated, the voices in the hall grew louder. Logan held the glass with a faint smile. It was now or never. Yet Emma remained where she was, wrestling with the weight of doubt and fear. Maybe someone else would notice. Maybe it wasn't her responsibility. Every justification felt more convincing than the last, but none were enough to silence the ache in her conscience. Then a loud laugh came from the hall. Derek was there, chatting casually as if the world were his stage. He didn't seem worried, which only fueled Emma's suspicions. This was what he did: manipulate, smile, and walk away unscathed. And her? She was just an insignificant piece in the machine. The thought made her shrink. Yet deep down, something in her still resisted. Courage tried to rise, even though it was smothered by fear. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, trying to quiet the internal battle. "It's just a dinner," she told herself, trying to downplay the significance of what was happening. But she knew it wasn't true. It couldn't be. Still, her legs wouldn't move, as if the floor had become a prison. Desperation grew, and time seemed to be running out. A decision had to be made. Before she could act, the sound of breaking glass came from the kitchen. The noise snapped her back to reality, like waking up from a disorienting dream. The fear was still there, but something new began to emerge, a hesitant yet real determination. Courage didn't need permission to exist. It was something that came from within, fueled by the resolve not to be silenced. Emma stepped out of the kitchen as if carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The hall was packed, every corner illuminated by opulent chandeliers casting a golden glow over the guests. The sound of laughter, conversations, and music was almost deafening, but to her, it felt muffled. Her eyes were fixed on Logan Hayes, the man at the center of all that attention, holding the tampered glass with a nonchalance that only heightened her urgency. The first step was the hardest. She knew all eyes would be on her the moment she spoke. A kitchen assistant had no place in that setting, let alone interrupting an event of this magnitude. Still, Emma pressed forward. Each step was a defiance of the rejection she faced daily. It was as if the strength that had brought her this far was growing, driven by the determination to prevent something terrible. When she finally spoke, her voice was louder than she expected. "Wait, don't drink that." The room seemed to freeze as the words left her mouth. All eyes turned to her, and the silence that followed was as oppressive as the laughter that erupted moments later. Someone muttered about unnecessary drama, and Emma felt the heat of embarrassment rise to her face. But she couldn't stop now. Logan, confused, looked at Emma, the glass still in his hand. "Who are you?" he asked, his expression shifting between curiosity and annoyance. Before she could respond, Derek appeared beside him, as if already prepared to disarm her. "Ah, this must be a misunderstanding," he said with a fake smile. "She's just nervous." "It's nothing." But Emma knew she couldn't let Derek control the narrative. "It's not nothing," Emma insisted, her voice trembling but firm. "I saw him tampering with your drink. Please, don't drink it." The desperation in her eyes was undeniable, and Logan hesitated for a moment. But before he could decide, he lifted the glass to his lips and took a sip. Emma felt her heart drop. It was too late, and panic consumed her. There was no time for words anymore. She had to act. Logan began coughing violently, dropping the glass to the floor. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the hall, and tension rose like a wave. Derek tried to take control, claiming Logan was merely feeling unwell from something he ate, but Emma didn't believe it for a second. She moved closer, ignoring the protests around her, and grabbed Logan's arm. "You need help now," she said with an authority that surprised even herself. As Logan continued to struggle, Emma shouted for help. Some guests murmured in confusion, while others simply stared, frozen. Derek tried to intervene, saying that taking Logan to the hospital was excessive, but Emma refused to listen. She knew that if she didn't act fast, the consequences could be fatal. Without hesitation, she pulled Logan, practically dragging him toward the exit. The chaos that followed was a blur. Emma heard shouting, felt furious glares, and even someone trying to stop her, but none of it mattered. Her determination outweighed any obstacle. Logan needed help, and she couldn't fail now. The rejection she had endured for so long seemed insignificant compared to what was at stake. Finally, she reached the exit, where a car was waiting. As she helped Logan into the back seat, Emma felt the tension in the air intensify. Derek was right behind her, protesting and trying to discredit her. "This is ridiculous. She's overreacting." But Emma ignored every word. The desperation in her chest transformed into fierce courage, the same courage that had pushed her to cross the invisible line between silence and action. Now, there was no turning back. The car sped toward the hospital, and Emma held Logan's hand, unsure if he was even conscious. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain: she had done what needed to be done. For the first time, she felt like more than an insignificant piece on the board. The hospital was chaos. Doctors and nurses rushed around as Emma tried to explain what had happened. Her voice was drowned out by the sound of sirens and confused murmurs around her. Logan was whisked away to the emergency room, leaving Emma alone in the waiting area, surrounded by accusatory looks. Despair began to creep back in. Derek arrived shortly after, wearing the calculated expression of someone who already knew how to manipulate the situation. "She did this," Derek declared, his calm tone making his words all the more dangerous. "This girl has always had issues at work, odd behavior. I knew something like this could happen." Emma felt her blood run cold. The rejection she had always faced at the restaurant now grew into something far worse, a direct accusation. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but the words seemed to escape before they could form. As she struggled to process everything, a young nurse named Jared approached her. He looked at Emma with a mix of curiosity and empathy. "You seem to believe what you're saying," he said quietly. "If it's true, we need evidence." It was the first time that night someone seemed willing to listen. The tension within her eased for a brief moment, only to be replaced by the determination to prove her innocence. Jared helped Emma access medical records and suggested running toxicology tests on Logan. But there was a problem. Derek was always nearby, blocking every attempt to investigate. He was charismatic, manipulative, and knew exactly how to use his charm to influence those around him. "There's no need for that," he insisted, with a smile that seemed unshakable. Logan probably just had a reaction to something he ate. Despite the obstacles, Emma felt she had found an ally in Jared. He not only believed her but also seemed willing to face the risks involved. Together, they started piecing together small clues. A shard of glass from the goblet, a sample of wine spilled on the floor, every detail was crucial. But time was against them, and the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Meanwhile, tests were underway. Jared uncovered a history of suspicious behavior linked to Derek. Questionable financial transactions, discrete conflicts at social events. Nothing outright incriminating, but enough to raise doubts. "This guy isn't a saint," Jared said, showing the documents to Emma. She felt a spark of hope but knew she was still far from proving anything. Derek, on the other hand, continued playing his game. He convinced the medical staff that Emma was a threat, insinuating that she had tampered with the drink to draw attention. The rejection she had faced in the restaurant now morphed into something far crueler. Every time she tried to speak, she was silenced by disdainful looks and accusations she couldn't refute. But Emma refused to give up. Amid all the chaos, Logan remained unconscious, caught between life and death. Emma knew he was the key to exposing Derek, but she didn't know if he would wake up in time. As she waited, anguish consumed her. The rejection she had felt her entire life now seemed small compared to the weight of being discredited in something so serious. Still, her determination remained intact. Finally, Jared managed to convince a doctor to run the necessary tests. "If we're right, this could change everything," he said as they prepared the samples. Emma looked at him with gratitude but also fear. Everything depended on those results. The tension in the air was almost palpable, and time seemed to drag. Every minute felt like an eternity, but Emma knew she couldn't falter now. As Emma awaited the test results at the hospital, the tension reached a breaking point. Derek, with his impeccable facade, called security and, without hesitation, pointed the finger at her. "She's responsible for this. It's obvious." Before Emma could react, 2 police officers arrived, summoned by Derek's influence. "You're under arrest on suspicion of poisoning," they said, handcuffing her. Emma protested, trying to explain that she had warned Logan to save him, but no one seemed interested in listening. Surrounded by scornful looks and whispered comments, she was escorted out of the hospital. Emma didn't know how she had ended up there. The cold walls of the cell seemed to echo the rejection she knew so well. She was alone, staring at the floor, replaying every second of that chaotic night. Derek had gotten what he wanted. He had made her the scapegoat. "A disgruntled employee," he had said, his fake smile so convincing that even Emma almost believed it for a moment. But deep inside, her determination still flickered, though faintly. Meanwhile, the hospital remained tense. Logan was still in a coma, and the toxicology tests were pending. Jared had promised to do everything he could to expedite the process, but Emma knew time was not on her side. Every passing second was an opportunity for Derek to solidify his lie. And there, in that cell, despair was a constant companion, trying to convince her that fighting was futile. The prison was a cruel reminder of how power structures could crush those who dared to challenge them. Emma was the perfect scapegoat, young, humble, with no connections. The system seemed designed to believe men like Derek, wealthy, articulate, and accustomed to getting away with everything. But Emma wasn't ready to give up. Even behind bars, she refused to fully surrender to the rejection surrounding her. While she waited, Jared found a way in. He visited Emma in jail, bringing news. "The tests are being processed," he said, his face serious but with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He had also uncovered more about Derek, including past cases of manipulation and abuse of power. "If we can link this to what happened to Logan, we can turn the tables." His words were a small relief, but Emma knew the path ahead was still long. The tension between them was palpable. Jared was risking a lot to help her, and Emma didn't know how to repay him. But she also knew she couldn't do this alone. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling but sincere. He shook his head, as if dismissing the need for gratitude. "It's not just for you," he replied. "It's for what's right." The phrase echoed in Emma's memories, a reminder of what had brought her to this point. That same day, evidence began to emerge. Jared gained access to records showing Derek in compromising situations, including a recent suspicious transaction. But it wasn't enough. Without Logan to confirm what had truly happened, the chances of exposing Derek were slim. Emma knew this, but she couldn't lose faith. It was a race against time, and every moment was crucial. Meanwhile, Derek remained free, feeding the narrative that Emma was an unstable employee. Using his influence, he worked to discredit any defense she might have. Even so, Jared persisted. He contacted reporters and leaked information about Derek's shady past, creating a small but significant stir in the media. The tension mounted, and Emma felt that something was about to change. In her cell, Emma began reflecting on everything that had happened. The rejection she had faced her entire life now seemed minor compared to the injustice she was enduring. But she knew her fight was no longer just for herself. It was for something bigger, something her mother had always believed in, doing what's right even when no one is watching. And Emma wasn't alone anymore. Jared was proof of that. The days in her cell were long, each minute marked by a mix of tension and despair. Emma clung to the small updates Jared brought during his visits. He had finally accessed preliminary toxicology results, confirming the presence of a substance in Logan's drink. It was progress, but not enough. Derek continued using his influence to discredit the evidence, manipulating authorities and the press. Jared brought another breakthrough, a document showing that Derek had purchased the substance found in Logan's drink weeks before the event. "It's something," Jared said, his voice a mix of exhaustion and determination. Emma felt a glimmer of hope. But the key piece was still missing: Logan. With him in a coma, the weight of the evidence was reduced, and Derek knew it. He seemed more confident than ever, like a gambler holding all the cards. Inside her cell, Emma reflected on her struggle. The constant rejection she had faced throughout her life now seemed like a prelude to what was happening. She was dismissed before she even had the chance to speak. Yet her determination grew. She knew she wasn't just fighting for her freedom but for something larger: the truth. Even when injustice loomed over her, she refused to be silenced. Jared, tireless in his efforts, continued digging. He discovered that Derek had been involved in a similar incident years ago, where he had manipulated evidence to frame someone else. The discovery was critical but also dangerous. Derek began to feel the pressure and became more aggressive. He used his contacts to try to block the investigation, creating even more tension for Emma and Jared. Meanwhile, Logan remained in a coma, seemingly caught between life and death. Emma knew he was the only one who could fully expose Derek. Each day that passed without Logan waking felt like a lost battle. But Emma refused to give up, and neither did Jared. He took the new documents to an investigative journalist, who started publicly questioning Derek's narrative. The media buzz grew louder. People began asking why Derek was so determined to discredit Emma. Small cracks began to appear in his carefully constructed facade, but he continued leveraging his influence to undermine her. The system seemed stacked in his favor, as it always was for powerful men. Yet Emma, with her unyielding determination, refused to be defeated. She knew the truth was on her side. And then, finally, news that changed everything. Logan began to show signs of improvement. He wasn't fully conscious, but it was enough to spark a new wave of hope. Jared entered the cell with the news, and for the first time in days, Emma felt the tide might be turning. "It's only a matter of time now," Jared said. "If he can speak, this could change everything." Derek, on the other hand, seemed to realize his control over the situation was slipping. He tried everything, manipulating the press, bribing officials, even attempting to intimidate Jared. But the nurse, who had seemed like a supporting character in the story, displayed a courage that even surprised Emma. "They can try to silence me," Jared said, "but the truth always finds a way." Waiting in her cell, Emma felt something inside her shift. The rejection that had always followed her now felt like fuel for her determination. She was no longer the same person who had hesitated to yell out and stop Logan from drinking. Now, she was ready to face anything to expose the truth. The moment of truth finally arrived. Emma was escorted from her cell to the hospital for a confrontation that would determine her fate. Logan was awake, still pale and weak but clear-headed enough to speak. When he saw Emma, he asked everyone to leave the room except for her. "I want to hear it from you," he said, his voice low but commanding. Trembling, Emma told him everything, what she had seen, what she had done, and why she had yelled for him not to drink the wine. Logan listened intently, never interrupting. When she finished, he took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on her. "I remember your voice," he said with a tired smile. "You tried to save me." For Emma, those words felt like a bolt of relief cutting through weeks of tension. She didn't know whether to cry or express her gratitude. For the first time, someone believed her without hesitation, and that someone was the one person who mattered most. Meanwhile, the evidence Jared had gathered continued to mount pressure on Derek. Now fully aware of what his brother had done, Logan asked to see the records. He reviewed them carefully, and a look of sadness crossed his face. "I knew he was capable of a lot," Logan murmured, almost to himself. "But this," he trailed off, his words hanging heavy in the air. To Emma, it was clear that Logan bore the weight of Derek's actions, even without direct guilt. Sensing his game was up, Derek disappeared before authorities could catch him. News of his escape spread quickly, creating a media frenzy. Logan, ashamed of his brother's betrayal, decided he couldn't remain silent. He called a press conference to reveal the truth, clearing Emma's name publicly. For Emma, the moment felt surreal. The rejection she had endured all her life seemed to shrink under the unexpected support she now received. Emma was officially released the same day. Jared met her at the hospital, bringing a bag of simple food and a relieved smile. "You're free," he said, as if the words carried as much weight as the freedom itself. Emma smiled, still processing what it all meant. Before she could respond, Logan appeared, leaning on a cane but with an expression of resolve. "I owe you a debt," he said, "and I intend to repay it." Logan offered Emma a position as the head chef at a new restaurant he was opening. To his surprise, she declined. "I don't want this as a reward," she said firmly. "I want to build my own path, without shortcuts." Logan looked puzzled for a moment, then smiled. "You're stronger than most people I know," he said. "I admire that." As Emma left the hospital, the weight of the injustice she had carried finally began to lift. Derek might still be on the run, but the truth had prevailed. Most importantly, she had found her voice, the one that had always been silenced by others' rejection and humiliation. Now, she knew she could face anything, because she had already faced the worst and come out victorious. Jared walked Emma to the exit, and they paused for a moment to breathe in the fresh night air. "What will you do now?" he asked. Emma looked out at the horizon, a faint smile forming on her lips. "I'm not sure yet," she replied. "But I'll figure it out." With her newfound freedom, Emma made the difficult decision to return to the restaurant to collect her belongings. She knew that place, filled with memories of rejection and disdain, was no longer part of her future. But there was something symbolic about confronting it one last time. Walking into the kitchen felt like facing an old ghost. The guilty, awkward glances of her colleagues followed her, but Emma stood tall. This time, she owned the narrative. The tyrannical chef, who had humiliated her countless times, tried a friendly approach, likely fearing the fallout from the story already making headlines. "Emma, I'm glad everything worked out," he said, forcing a smile. But she knew it was just an attempt to salvage his own reputation. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady and emotionless. There was nothing more to say. She had moved past that environment and the people who had tried to diminish her. As she packed her things, Emma realized how small that place seemed now. The kitchen, once the only space where she thought she could prove her worth, had become a prison. Now she understood she didn't need anyone's validation there. Her courage, determination, and resilience had proven to be far greater than the limitations others had tried to impose on her. And that was something no one could take away. Walking through the dining area for the last time, Emma noticed how invisible she had felt there before. But now she felt seen, albeit in a different way. Some restaurant patrons recognized her from the media coverage and glanced at her with curiosity, but she didn't mind. For the first time, she wasn't trying to hide or fit in. She was simply herself, and that was more than enough. Outside, the cool night air enveloped her like a comforting embrace. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel the relief of being free from that cycle of rejection. Logan had offered his support, and Jared continued to encourage her, but she knew it was time to build something of her own. The small recipe notebook in her bag felt lighter now, a symbol of what she wanted to do: create, rebuild, and take charge of her own story. In the days that followed, Emma began working on her plans. With Logan's insistence on helping in some way, she found a small space to open her own cafe. It wasn't grand, but it was enough to start. The place reflected who she was: warm, authentic, a space where every dish told a story. For Emma, there was no greater reward than turning her love for cooking into something she could share with the world. As Emma painted the walls of her new cafe, Jared showed up with a bucket of paint and a smile. "I couldn't let you do this alone," he said in the laid-back tone she had come to know so well. Emma laughed, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. "You've already done more than enough," she replied. But deep down, she knew that their friendship was one of the greatest treasures she had gained on this journey. The day of the grand opening arrived, and with slightly trembling hands, Emma unlocked the doors to her cafe for the first customers. Logan was the first to walk in, followed by Jared and a few people who had followed her story in the media. The space quickly filled, and for the first time, Emma felt she was exactly where she was meant to be, not as an assistant or a victim, but as someone who had found her voice and her path. The days at the cafe began to find their rhythm, but Emma knew the journey was far from over. The freedom of being in control of her own life was a sensation she had never experienced before, but it came with new challenges. Local food critics, curious about her story, began visiting the cafe. Emma knew these moments could define her future. Even so, she felt a calm she never thought she could have. The rejection that once consumed her now felt distant, almost irrelevant. One day, as she was reviewing a new menu, Emma received an unexpected call. It was her former boss from the restaurant. He tried to convince her to come back, offering a better position and a significant salary increase. "Your talent was always noticed, Emma," he said, with a kindness that felt as fake as it was unexpected. But Emma knew she couldn't return to the place that had almost destroyed her self-esteem. "Thank you, but I've found my place," she replied, with a firmness that surprised even herself. As she navigated her present decisions, Emma also reflected on the past. The rejection and hardships she had faced shaped who she was but no longer defined her worth. She no longer saw herself as the invisible kitchen assistant but as someone who had built something from the ground up with courage and determination. Every day at the cafe, she felt herself being reborn, rediscovering parts of herself that had been hidden by fear and the disdain of others. Logan, in turn, was also embarking on his own transformation. He became a regular at the cafe, not as a magnate offering financial support, but as someone genuinely inspired by Emma's strength. He decided to use his influence differently, investing in social projects, including a fund for young cooks from humble backgrounds. "I've learned so much from you," he told Emma one day. "And I want to make sure others get a chance too." Jared, who had never drifted away, became a constant presence at the cafe. He joked with customers, lent a hand during busy hours, and occasionally offered advice on handling day-to-day challenges. To Emma, he was more than a friend. He was a living reminder that genuine connections could arise even in the darkest times. Their friendship was a constant reassurance that she was never truly alone. But not everything was easy. Derek's name occasionally resurfaced in the news, and Emma knew he was still on the run. Though justice hadn't been fully served, she refused to let it consume her. The truth has already come out, she told herself. The rest will happen in due time. This mindset was new to her but showed just how much she had grown. Emma no longer felt the need to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. As the cafe thrived, Emma began to dream again. She envisioned expanding the menu, offering cooking classes, and maybe even opening a second location one day. Above all, she wanted every person who entered the cafe to feel the same comfort she had found while overcoming her own challenges. Every dish, every smile, every moment in the cafe was a celebration of all she had achieved. One day, as she served coffee to a regular customer, she heard something that made her smile. "You know, this place has something special," the customer said. "It's not just the food, it's like you've put a piece of yourself into every dish." Emma thanked them, feeling those words were the greatest reward she could receive. The cafe wasn't just a business, it was a reflection of everything she had overcome. At the end of the night, as Emma turned off the lights and looked at the empty tables, she felt a peace she had never experienced before. The journey hadn't been easy, but every step, every rejection, and every moment of despair had brought her here. And as she locked the door, she knew the future was an open field of possibilities, waiting to be explored. Emma was finally at home, not in a physical place, but within herself,